Hello and welcome to Connecting Student Development Theory and Practice. My name is Lane Washington, and I serve as the Assistant Director for Strategic Partnership and Outreach in the Office of Student Life at Ohio State. I'm also a doctoral candidate in the Higher Education and Student Affairs program. Now, how often have you asked yourself this existential question of who am I? Well, believe it or not, you're not the only one. College students for decades, centuries, millennium have asked themselves this ever big question. Now, during this session, I might not be able to give you all the answers, but what I hope to do is give you tools and resources to help yourself and the students you work with answer this very big question. Welcome to an introduction of student identity development. In this session, we will cover the following. First, I'll explain the idea of identity and how it relates to our work with college students. Second, you'll examine your own social identities and consider which are most salient to you in the context of your work as a student affairs professional. At the end of the session, I'll ask you to reflect on your own social identities and how they've shaped your experiences. You'll also create a plan to continue to think about these ideas moving forward. Before moving into the content of this lesson, I want to emphasize that this module is merely an introduction to a very big topic. Identity work is complicated and highly personal. We've dedicated the next 3 sessions of this course to identity, and there's still a lot we won't be able to cover. Talking about identity rarely comes easy, and it can be very complex. But one of the lessons I hope you will take away from this session is this. The important thing is to make the effort to learn about our identities, reflect on how they shape our view of the world around us, and consider how students explore their own identities during college. Let's begin by asking, what is identity? You'll recall from session 1 how the student personnel point of view, the founding document of our profession, expressed a commitment to developing the student as a whole. In addition to figuring out their major and career plans, college is a time when many students gain a greater awareness and understanding for who they are. In other words, gaining an awareness for their identity. In the student affairs profession, identity refers to a belief about yourself in relation to social groups such as race, gender, and sexual orientation, among others. Each of us has multiple dimensions of identities. As you saw in the worksheet you completed as prep work, these dimensions include ability, age, social class, sexual orientation, along with other dimensions not listed. If you haven't yet completed the activity titled Social Identities Inventory, pause the video and complete it now. Looking at your responses to the worksheet, you'll see different social groups or communities you belong to. How we relate to these groups or choose to express ourselves often changes depending on the context. It's natural to feel a stronger or weaker attachment to different identities depending on the situation. This illustrates the fluid nature of identity. As identities feel more or less important to us, we say they become more or less salient. In some contexts, an identity may feel very salient to you, and in others, the same identity may feel less so. For example, let's imagine a student who grew up in a community surrounded by people who practice the same religion. That religion practiced certain customs, celebrated certain holidays, and observed certain dietary restrictions. Growing up, the student felt so familiar with these customs, they were viewed as normal. Religion was important, but it wasn't something the student spent a lot of time thinking about. Then, let's imagine when that student moved to college. They discovered there weren't many others who shared the same religious beliefs. Worship, holidays, and even finding certain foods weren't as routine as back home. In other words, it became more salient. It's pretty common for students to be surprised by the diversity on campus when they arrive at college. For some students, a campus may seem like the most diverse place they've ever lived. Others may feel like a campus is less diverse than their hometown. Regardless, navigating these dynamics is a big reason why many students are so attuned to their identities during college, and why certain identities become more or less salient to them. Taking time to consider how college students think about their identities is an essential part of the student affairs profession. But so is having an awareness for your own identities. Take a moment to review your social identity inventory and check the identities you think about most or least often when you're at work. The social identity inventory listed different types of social identities commonly referenced in the United States. Now, we don't have time to fully explore each of these identities, but I will discuss a few of them that often raise questions. For those of you who want to learn more about these identities listed on the worksheet, be sure to check out the supplemental resources. We'll begin by explaining the differences between race and ethnicity. It is important to know that there is no true definition of race. Scholars and practitioners around the world have debated this topic. People have often defined race as phenotypical differences, such as skin color. However, scientists have found there is little genetic differences between racial groups. With this in mind, This is where the idea of a social construct becomes more apparent. We as a people have created differences amongst each other and attributed values to how we identify people racially, despite little to no differences at all. This form of tethering has allowed for people to socially and historically bind people to a group and then determine their collective values and traits. Scholars Omi and Wynant have defined race as a concept which signifies and symbolizes social conflicts and interests by referring to different types of the human body. In the United States, this is expressed as being identified as Black, Asian, White, Latinx, Indigenous, and the list goes on and on. Ethnicity, on the other hand, has been defined as the result of group formation based on culture and descent. So while my race may be Black, I am also African American, rather than, let's say, Jamaican or Brazilian. Another example of an ethnicity is Japanese, where the race could be considered Asian, or an ethnicity could be Irish and the race white. Family traditions, customs, and norms are some of the aspects related to ethnicity. Certain types of food serve as an example of a custom or tradition, like pasta for Italians. Next, we'll look at the differences between gender and sex. We often think of gender in an incorrect man-woman binary. However, a person can identify as man, woman, transgender, or gender nonconforming, just to name a few. Gender can be seen as an interrelationship between body, identity, and expression. Our body can be described as the way we interact and experience our own body, and how society genders us or determines our gender. Gender identity is internal and describes the way we feel about ourselves. Gender identity can be masculine, feminine, a blend of both, or neither. Finally, gender expression describes how we outwardly present ourselves to the world. This can include the clothes we wear, our hairstyle, mannerisms, and so much more. Sex describes the body and the sex organs we possessed at birth. Examples of this would be male, female, or intersex. This often corresponds to sex characteristics we possess. I use the word often to emphasize that some individuals will transition their sex to better reflect who they are over the course of their lifetime. So, to recap, race refers to phenotypical differences like skin color, while ethnicity refers to cultural association. Sex refers to biological characteristics, while gender takes account of our body and how we think about ourselves and how we choose to express ourselves to the world. Remember, the many dimensions of our identity are constantly changing. As student-first professionals, it's important to take time and reflect on how we understand our identities and why they may be more or less salient to us in different contexts. We have to engage in this self-work before trying to understand how students think about their own identities during college. The activity that follows this lesson will guide you through a reflection exercise about your own social identities. In the next session, we'll build on this introduction by considering how some identities confer power and privilege, while others do not. Well, that about covers it for us today. Thank you so much for your time. If you have any other questions or comments, please use the discussion board. And if you want to know more about where I got this information, references will be provided on the next slide.